The ship was already on fire when Ethan Cole pulled her out of it. Not metaphorically. The hull of the crashed vessel was peeling back in ribbons of burning metal, and the smoke rising from the wreckage was a color no human had a name for yet. Somewhere between green and the feeling of wrongness that lives at the back of the throat. Ethan had been on a survey run through the outer rim of the Korovan system, alone, underpaid, and irritated, when his scanner lit up like someone had dropped a sun on his dashboard. He almost flew past it. That was the part he would think about later, in the dark, when sleep would not come. He almost kept going. Instead, he set down his scout vessel on the ridge overlooking the crash site, grabbed his emergency kit, and ran toward the burning thing, because that was what a person did. He was not thinking about first contact protocols. He was not thinking about galactic law or the 14 forms the Earth diplomatic corps would later require him to fill out in triplicate. He was thinking that something was alive in there. He could hear it. The sound coming from the wreckage was not quite a scream. It was more like the idea of a scream, played at a frequency that lived just below hearing, and it made his back teeth ache. He went in anyway. She was pinned under a collapsed support strut near what he assumed was the cockpit. Though the cockpit of this vessel looked nothing like any cockpit Ethan had ever seen. It looked more like someone had grown a cockpit from a seed, and then argued with it about the design halfway through. Organic curves, bioluminescent panels flickering in distress, controls that appeared to breathe. She was also nothing like anything Ethan had ever seen. Tall, silver-gray skin that caught the firelight and threw it back in fragments. 4 fingers on each hand, the joints bending in more directions than joints were supposed to bend. Her eyes, when they opened, were solid amber, no pupil, no white. And they locked onto his face with an intensity that made him feel like something being read. She said something. He did not understand a single syllable of it. He understood the expression, though. He had seen that expression on every creature he had ever pulled out of a bad situation. It was the face of someone who had already accepted dying and was now furiously revising that plan. "I've got you," he said, which was not information she could use, but it was all he had. He got the strut off her using the leverage bar from his kit, a considerable amount of swearing, and one moment where he was genuinely certain the whole section of hull was going to come down on both of them. It did not. He counted that as a personal victory. She could not walk. Her left leg, structured differently than a human leg, with an extra joint in the lower section, was clearly damaged. Ethan made a decision the diplomatic corps would also later have opinions about, and he picked her up. She went rigid in his arms, not struggling, not panicking. Rigid, the way a person goes rigid when their entire nervous system has issued a verdict, and the verdict is, do not move or something terrible will happen. He walked back to his ship. She did not make a sound. Inside, on with the hatch sealed and the fire becoming someone else's problem for the next 20 minutes, Ethan set her down on the narrow med bunk and took stock. She was breathing, or doing something that served the same purpose. Her skin had gone from silver gray to a pale, almost translucent tone that his gut told him was not a good sign. One of her shoulder panels, he did not have a better word for the ridge of structured cartilage along her shoulder, was fractured. The leg was worse. His med kit was designed for humans. He used it anyway. She watched him the whole time, those amber eyes tracking every movement, cataloging, deciding. At some point in the process, she said something again, shorter this time, and her tone had shifted into something that was not quite a question, but was shaped like one. "Ethan," he said, and pointed at himself. She looked at his finger, looked at his face, looked at his finger again, with an expression suggesting she found this communication method deeply inadequate. Then she said something that had a hard consonant at the start and ended in a sound like wind moving through a narrow space. "Okay," Ethan said. "I'm going to call you Rin until we figure out the rest." She did not object, possibly because she had no idea what he had said, and possibly because she had identified a more urgent concern, which was that her ship was now a metal campfire on a ridge 200 meters away. She was on a vessel crewed by a single alien of unknown classification, and her translator implant, based on the small blinking light behind her left ear that had gone from blue to red, was either damaged or dead. She was cut off, alone, her hurt. Ethan had seen that math done on a face before. He did not look away when she did it. He heated the last protein pack in his stores, the good one he had been saving, the one with actual flavor, and held it out to her. She stared at it. He ate a bite of his own to demonstrate the concept. She stared at him. He shrugged and set it within her reach and went back to checking her bandaging. And after approximately 4 minutes of internal deliberation, so visible it was almost audible, she picked it up and ate it. Outside, the ship burned itself out against the ridge. Inside, the silence between them was not the silence of strangers. It was something more like the silence of two people who had just survived the same storm from different sides of it and were still figuring out what that meant. Your Ethan set a course for the nearest relay station. Rin watched the stars through the porthole and held the empty protein pack in her 4-fingered hands like it was something she intended to keep. He would find out later what she had been running from. He would find out later what she was. Right now, he just flew. The relay station at Kerovan Outpost 7 was not built for diplomacy. It was built for ore processing, minor repairs, and the specific kind of loneliness that accumulates in people stationed too far from anything that matters. It smelled like coolant and recycled air and the stubborn ghost of someone's cooking from 3 shifts ago. Ethan docked at 0340 station time, which meant the bay was staffed by one sleepy attendant named Chuck, who looked at the manifest, looked at Ethan, looked at the manifest again, and said, "It says you've got a medical case." "I do," Ethan said. "Human?" "Not exactly." Chuck looked up. "I need the medical bay, and I need a linguist on the comm," Ethan said. In that order. He had spent the 7-hour transit doing 3 things. First, keeping Rin stable. Her color had evened back towards silver gray, which he had decided to treat as improvement until told otherwise. Second, running everything his ship's computer could pull on known species in this sector. Third, not thinking too hard about the way she had watched him while he worked. Like she was rewriting something. Like whatever category she had filed him under at the start of the flight was no longer the right category, and she was looking for the correct one. Under the medical bay at Outpost 7 had a diagnostic table that had been recalibrated for non-standard biology 14 months ago. According to the maintenance log Ethan pulled up while the on-call medic, a compact, efficient woman named Dr. Paula Osei, who looked like she had been awake for 6 hours already and was prepared to be awake for 6 more, reviewed the sensor data Ethan had collected. "The leg is manageable," Dr. Osei said, not looking up. "The shoulder fracture is more complicated because I'm not certain of the function of the secondary cartilage structure, and I don't want to stabilize it in a position that causes problems later." She finally looked up. "Where did you find her?" "Crash site. Outer Rim, Caravan 3. Alone?" The ship was 1 crew configured. "Yes." Dr. Osei looked at Rin, who was sitting upright on the diagnostic table with the posture of someone who had decided that if they were going to be examined by unknown creatures, they were going to do it with dignity. She's been conscious the whole time, since I pulled her out. And she hasn't tried to leave? No. Dr. Osei made a small sound that was not quite impressed and not quite something else. Okay, let me work. Ethan stepped back. Rin's amber eyes followed him to the corner of the room. He leaned against the wall and crossed his arms and looked back. The linguist on the comm was a specialist from the Earth Diplomatic Corps named Dr. Felix Amos, who took 14 minutes to appear on screen, arrived in what appeared to be a bathrobe, and immediately became far more engaged when Ethan put the visual feed on Rin. "That's Velhari," Dr. Amos said. His voice had gone from annoyed to something that people who study languages get when they are standing at the edge of something large. "She's Velhari. We have maybe 40 words of their language in the database. 40. The fleet's been trying to establish contact for 9 years. Well, Ethan said, I've been calling her Rin. The silence from Dr. Amos's end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Do not, he said carefully. Nickname a Velhari diplomat. I don't know that she's a diplomat. 1 crew vessel, outer rim, no military markings, crashed in a sector where Velhari ships have never been documented before. Dr. Amos was already pulling up files off screen. She's something. She's absolutely something. On the diagnostic table, Rin was watching the screen, watching Dr. on Amos with a focus that was categorically different from the way she had been watching Ethan. Ethan clocked that difference without being able to name it yet. Dr. Osei finished her initial assessment and stepped back. She needs 2 days rest minimum. The leg needs a structured brace for her joint configuration, which I can fabricate. But the design will take a few hours. The shoulder I want to monitor before I do anything to it. She stays here? Unless you have a better facility on that scout ship of yours. Dr. Osei said it without particular judgment, which was almost worse. Ethan looked at Rin. Rin looked at Ethan. Dr. Amos was talking rapidly about communication protocols and notification requirements and the 14 forms in triplicate. And all of that was probably correct and important, and Ethan would deal with it. But first he crossed the room and sat down in the chair beside the diagnostic table, close enough that Rin could see him clearly, and he said, You're staying here for a couple of days. You're going to be okay. I'll be here. She did not understand the words. She understood the staying. Something in her expression shifted. Barely. The way a change in barometric pressure is barely anything until it isn't. And she looked down at her hands and then back at him. She said the sound again, the one with the hard consonant and the wind at the end. Yeah, Ethan said. Rin. From the comm screen, Dr. Amos made a sound that a man makes when he has accepted a battle he is not going to win. The brace Dr. Osei fabricated looked nothing like any brace Ethan had seen, which made sense, because Rin's leg looked nothing like any leg Ethan had seen. It was a structure of flexible composite material that supported the additional joint without restricting the range of motion that joint was supposed to have. And when Dr. Osei fitted it, Rin examined it with the thoroughness of someone who had an engineering background and was checking the work. She found nothing wrong with it. The acknowledgement she gave Dr. Osei was minimal, a fractional tilt of her head. But Dr. Osei received it like it was a full paragraph. She's smart, Dr. Osei said to Ethan, in the tone of someone offering information they suspect is not new. Yeah, Ethan said. I noticed. The translator situation was the urgent problem. Dr. Amos had spent the night pulling every Velhari language fragment from the database and loading them into a portable translation unit, which he had shipped on the next available fast courier, 18 hours out. Until it arrived, communication was a construction project with no shared tools. Ethan and Ryan were building something out of gesture, expression, demonstration. And the 40 words Dr. Amos had fed into Ethan's personal comm unit in a file that was more apology than dictionary. What they established in those 18 hours, Rin understood numbers. Not human numerals. Ethan had to use objects, counts, arrangements. But the concept of quantity was a shared language, which meant relative time was possible once they built a reference point. She did not like the station. Not the people in it, not the construction, not the recycled air. She tolerated all of it, with the composure of someone who had decided that this situation was temporary and could be endured. She liked the porthole in the medical bay. She sat in front of it for long stretches and watched the stars with an attention that was not passive. She was reading them, looking for something. Ethan caught her once with his star chart pulled up on her datapad. He had left it within reach without thinking about it. And she was cross-referencing his map against the sky visible through the porthole, one finger tracing routes. She stopped when she saw him watching, met his eyes, did not put the datapad down. He sat beside her and let her keep it. At hour 16, 3 things happened within the span of 40 minutes. The first was that a Velhari vessel appeared on Outpost 7's long-range sensors. Large, military configuration, moving at a speed that was not exploratory. The second was that station commander, a heavy-set man named Lieutenant Commander Gary Park, who wore his authority like a coat that had slightly shrunk in the wash, called Ethan into his office and explained, with the careful tone of a person delivering news they expect will land badly, that the Velhari vessel had transmitted a message. The message, once run through every translation tool the station had, resolved into 2 pieces of information. First, that the individual currently in Outpost 7's medical bay was not a diplomat. Second, that the Velhari required her return immediately. The third thing was that when Ethan returned to the medical bay, Marin was standing at the porthole, and she had gone completely still, the way living things go still when they know something is coming and have not yet decided how to meet it. Her skin had shifted color again. Not the pale translucent of injury, but something colder, a gray with a blue undertone that Ethan had no reference for. She turned when he came in. She had heard the alert. Of course she had. She was not missing anything happening in this station. Ethan stopped in the doorway. She said something. A single sentence, low and even. And the tone of it was not a question and not a statement, but the kind of thing a person says when they are establishing what they know before they say what they want. He spread his hands. The translation unit was still 2 hours out. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she crossed the room, slower than usual, the brace doing its job, and stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the way the bioluminescence under her skin was cycling, which he had learned was something it did when she was thinking hard. She put one 4-fingered hand on his forearm, not gripping, just contact. Her amber eyes steady on his. And then she said quietly, the name he had given her. Rin, Ethan said back. She shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion. And then she said the original sound. The real one. The one with the hard consonant and the wind. And she said it 3 times, carefully, like she was teaching it rather than repeating it. Ethan tried it. He got it wrong twice. On the 3rd attempt, something in her expression shifted in the way things shift when a code breaks open. She had told him her name, the real one. Outside, the Velhari vessel was still coming. Ethan took a breath. Okay, he said. We need to talk about what you are. And I need you to understand that whatever it is, it changes exactly nothing about the fact that I'm not letting them take you until you tell me you want to go." She did not understand the words. She kept her hand on his arm. It was enough. The translation unit arrived at hour 18, 40 minutes before the Valhari vessel was due to achieve docking distance. Dr. Amos walked Ethan through it via comm with the focus of a man who understood that the next conversation would matter in ways that could not be undone. The device was small, clipped to the collar, and operated on a learning algorithm, meaning the first hour of use would be rough, full of approximations and structural guesses, but it would improve with every exchange. Ethan handed it to Rin. She examined it. Her fingers moved over the casing with that engineering attention he had come to recognize. She found the clip mechanism, studied it, and attached it to the structural ridge at her collar with more confidence than the device's design suggested it deserved. Then she said something. The unit processed for 2 seconds. It said, in a flat, synthesized voice that was nothing like her actual sound, "You gave me your name before you gave me this." "Yes," Ethan said. The unit processed her response. Why? Because names matter more than tools? 2 seconds of processing. On her face, something that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same conceptual space. "I am called Navari," the unit said. And then, and after a pause that felt deliberate, "Rin is acceptable." Lieutenant Commander Park appeared in the doorway behind Ethan with the expression of a man who had a script prepared and was already sensing that the script was not going to survive contact with this room. "The Valhari vessel is requesting to speak with whoever is responsible for the individual in our medical bay," Park said. "That's me," Ethan said. "Cole, you're a survey contractor. You don't have standing to—" "I pulled her out of a burning ship and kept her alive for 20 hours. Until somebody with more standing than me shows up, I'm what's available." Ethan looked at Park without hostility and without apology. "Put them through." Park looked at Rin. Rin looked at Park with amber eyes that were doing their reading thing, and then Park made the call that most reasonable people make when looked at that way. He stepped aside. The Valhari communication came through on the medical bay screen. The individual on the other end was in military configuration. Ethan could tell not from the garments, which were nothing like military wear in any human frame of reference, but from the posture, the economy of movement, the way they sat in the frame, in command, in certainty. They spoke. The translation unit on Rin's collar processed. It said, "Return the archive." The unit processed Rin's response. Rin's voice was even, controlled. "Not archive," the unit said for her. "Witness." Silence on the other end. Ethan looked at Rin. She looked at the screen, then at Ethan, then back at the screen. The translation unit processed her next sentence with a 2-second lag that felt much longer. "This human," it said, "kept me alive when his survival calculation said otherwise. I will speak with him before I speak with you." The Valhari officer on screen went very still. Ethan had the feeling, specific and groundless and correct the way feelings sometimes are, that Rin had just done something that had not been done before. "Give me an hour," he said to the screen. To the Valhari officer, who was watching him with an expression he could not parse. "1 hour, then we talk." No response. The feed stayed open, which Ethan took as neither agreement nor refusal. He turned to Rin. "What's a witness?" he said. The translation unit worked on her answer. It said, "The Valhari do not record history in text. The history lives in a person who watched it happen. The archive, they called me, is the record of something they do not want outside their control. She paused. I watched a Velhari general kill his own fleet rather than accept a ceasefire. I am the only one who saw it. Ethan absorbed that. And the crash? Not an accident. The bioluminescence under her skin was cycling fast now. They will be polite, the translation unit said for her, because this station has human military capability and they do not want a conflict they cannot predict. But they want me back because I am a record that, if shared, ends a political arrangement that benefits a great number of powerful people. And if you go back? She looked at him for a long time. Records, the unit said, can be erased. Outside in the corridor, Ethan could hear Park on his comm, talking to people above his pay grade. The Velhari feed was still open, the officer on the other end waiting with the patience of someone who had already mapped all available outcomes and was prepared for each of them. Ethan sat down in the chair next to the diagnostic table, the one he had been sitting in for 18 hours. Okay, he said. Tell me everything. We have an hour and I want to know all of it. Rin sat beside him. She started talking. The hour went fast and did not feel fast. Rin spoke and the translation unit worked through it in fragments, pieces arriving in the right order but with the texture of something hand-built. And Ethan listened the way he had learned to listen in the outer rim, where information came in incomplete and you built the picture from what you had. What she told him, 12 years ago, in a conflict that the Velhari High Command referred to in official record as a border stabilization, a general named Vikar had made a decision. The ceasefire that would have ended 18 months of war was on the table. Both sides had signed the preliminary agreement. And then, in the space between the signing and the implementation, Vikar had destroyed his own damaged vessels, 3 warships carrying wounded personnel, and logged them as enemy kills. The war had continued for 4 more years. The ceasefire terms, when the conflict finally ended, were significantly more favorable to the Velhari coalition Vikar served. Vikar was now one of the 7 voices of the Velhari High Council. Rin had been a junior navigator on a diplomatic observation vessel. She had been in a position, through a navigational error that had placed her ship exactly where it should not have been, to watch the entire sequence of events through her sensor log. She had recorded it. She had reported it through proper channels. The channels had not led where channels were supposed to lead. For 11 years, Rin had been moved, reassigned, transferred. The kind of institutional management that is not imprisonment because it never needs to be, as long as the person being managed understands the shape of the walls. She had played the game for 11 years because she had been waiting for one specific thing, a way out of Velhari jurisdiction. The crash, Ethan said. My shuttle had a navigation failure. The translation unit said for her, thus both the failure and the destination were intentional. You crashed on purpose? I calculated a survivable impact zone. A pause. The margin was smaller than preferred. Ethan thought about the burning hull, the smoke in that color with no name, the strut. And you needed someone to find you who was outside Velhari authority. I needed a human, the translation unit said. And then, after a pause that the unit rendered in silence, but that Ethan could see was something she was choosing. I had read the treaty records. Humans are... The unit processed for longer than usual. There is not a precise translation. The closest is unpredictable in the direction of intervention. That's not a compliment in most languages. In mine, it is not an insult. In the corridor, Park's voice had taken on the tone of someone who had been transferred up the chain twice and was now speaking with someone who had actual authority. Ethan had maybe 20 minutes before that authority arrived in the room with him. "You have the sensor log," he said. "You kept it." "Here," the translation unit said for her. She touched the area below her left ear, where the damaged translator implant had gone dark. "The implant has two functions. I allowed them to damage the translation function. The record is intact. They know this. They know I have a record. They do not know where." A pause. "They do not know it survived the crash." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" he said. "Specifically, what outcome are you looking for here?" The translation unit worked through her response. "The sensor log transmitted to a body outside Velhari Authority that is large enough to survive the political response," it said. "The evidence does not need to destroy Vakar. It needs to be known. A secret that 2 entities hold is not a secret. A secret that 10,000 entities hold is history. The Earth Diplomatic Corps has a direct line to every major galactic governing body," Ethan said. "Yes. And Dr. Amos is on the comm right now." I had observed that. Of course she had. Ethan stood up. He went to the door and looked at Park, who had finished his call and was standing in the corridor with a new expression. The expression of a man who had been told the scope of what was in his medical bay and was revising all previous assessments. "Get me Dr. Amos on a secure line," Ethan said. "And tell the Velhari vessel that we need 45 minutes. Park looked at him. "They're not going to wait 45 minutes. "They will, if you tell them the delay is because we're consulting with Earth Diplomatic Corps before we respond to any requests involving a potential witness in a war crimes matter." Park stared at him. "You can phrase it differently if you want," Ethan said. "But that's the information. Use it." Park made the call. Ethan went back in. Rin was standing at the porthole. The Velhari vessel was visible now, not as a visual, the distance was still too great for that, but as a marker on the navigation overlay on the wall display, moving and then stopped, holding position. She spoke without turning from the porthole. "You could have passed this to your authorities and removed yourself from the situation," the translation unit said for her. "Why are you still in it?" Ethan stood beside her and looked at the display. "The same reason I went into the burning ship," he said. "It didn't occur to me not to." She turned from the porthole, those amber eyes. "Reading." "Your species," the translation unit said, working through her sentence with its usual lag, "spends considerable energy pretending you are less than you are." "Yeah," Ethan said. "It's a whole thing." Dr. Amos appeared on the comm screen. He was dressed now. He looked like a man who had understood the situation and arrived at the correct size for it. "Tell me everything," he said. Rin looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Rin. "Her," Ethan said to the screen. "She'll tell you." Rin turned to the comm screen and began to speak. The translation unit worked. Dr. Amos stopped breathing for a moment somewhere in the middle of it, and then resumed. And then began to write things down with the focused urgency of a man who knows he is recording something that will matter for a long time. Outside, the Velhari vessel held its position. Inside, the record that had been kept for 11 years in the dark finally found the light. It was not the ending. It was not even close to the ending. But it was the moment when the scales tipped, barely in a direction they had not been tipping before, and the people in that room all understood. Through their different senses, in their different ways, with their different understandings of what this cost and what it was worth, that something had changed. Ethan looked at Rin when Dr. Amos stepped away from the screen to make his own series of calls to his own series of people up his own chain of authority. She was watching the porthole again. Her skin had gone back to silver gray. Warm. The bioluminescence cycling slowly, the rhythm of it something he was starting to be able to read. "What happens now?" he said. "For you." The translation unit worked through her answer. "I become the record that is known," it said. "I am no longer a secret. A record that is known cannot be erased. It can only be disputed, and I have the sensor log." A pause. "I become, in your terms, a person who is difficult to make disappear." "And Vakar?" "Vakar has 11 years of careful arrangement to unwind. It will take time." Another pause. "But time is a thing I now have." She turned from the porthole and looked at Ethan. The translation unit processed her next sentence carefully, its lag slightly longer than usual, as if the algorithm was selecting among available translations and choosing the one that carried the right weight. "You gave me your name," it said, "before you knew what I was or what I carried. And you stayed." The bioluminescence under her skin cycled once, slowly. "The Velhari do not have an equivalent gesture in our formal language. We have one in personal language. It is spoken only once and only to someone who has remained when leaving," was the easier calculation. She said a sound then, not through the unit, not for translation. Directly, the way she had told him her real name. Ethan could not say it back. He tried, and got it wrong, and she watched him try without impatience. And on the third attempt, something in the sound was close enough that she made that expression again. The one that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Rin," he said. "Ethan," the translation unit said for her. In the corridor, Park was managing the incoming authority with the sound of a man finding his footing in a larger story than he had started his day expecting. On the screen, Dr. Amos was doing things that would take weeks to fully materialize, but that had already, in this moment, become inevitable. In the nav display, the Velhari vessel was holding its position, because the 45 minutes had become something else now. Something that Velhari legal protocol required them to observe once a diplomatic body was formally involved. Rin stayed at the porthole. Then Ethan sat down in his chair. They did not need to talk. They had said the things that needed saying. Outside the station, in the particular darkness of the outer rim that is different from other darknesses because it contains fewer lights and more distance, the universe was the same size it had always been. Inside the medical bay of a mining and repair outpost that smelled like coolant and someone's old cooking, the distance between two species had changed by some small and uncountable amount. Ethan Cole had almost flown past the crash site. He hadn't. That was, in the end, the whole of it.